First story. I have to be the dumbest man on earth. My wife was in the hospital and had just given birth to a brown-eyed, red-haired little boy. That sent off sirens in my head. The baby was very light-skinned and had these cute little dimples. Yep, it turns out that there is a story to tell. My wife told one, and now it's time for the truth. Hi, I'm Jeff Patterson, and my wife is the one and only Jen. I never thought my wife would cheat on me. I love her with all my heart. Before we got together, Jen had been married to Hugh for 8 years, and they had one son. Hugh Jr. Hugh Sr. was never an issue for me because he truly didn't care what was going on with Jen. I know this because Hugh is one of my lodge brothers. Hugh said from the beginning that he thought she was a 304. Hugh said, "Jeff, you can't turn a 304 into a housewife." I was pissed, and of course, I wanted to take it outside. When Hugh came outside, he put his hand up to say stop, and then asked me why we were fighting. I said, "Hugh, I can't have you calling my wife a 304. I know she's your ex, but I am her husband now." He stood there and looked at me. He said, "You're right, Jeff. I am sorry, but as a brother of this lodge, when the time is right, you'll need my help. Don't be afraid to ask for it." He shook my hand and went back inside. It would be a long time before he called Jen a 304 again. I felt from that moment he was a friend. He never held anything against me and even seconded a few of my motions, so I had no problem with him. Jen, on the other hand, hated Hugh with a passion. At lodge events, she would go out of her way to compete with him and his wife, Sammy. Once Sammy was talking to a few of the lodge wives when Jen came up and asked, "How's the deadbeat doing?" Sammy smiled and replied, "Very well. He just bought me a Range Rover. It's a couple of years old, but it's good for the family." Jen said, "I don't see him around. He must be at the bar." Sammy said, "No, he's outside talking to the lodge president about building a clubhouse for the kids." With that, Jen left, walked over to me, and said, "We need a new car. A new Range Rover, and it needs to be fully loaded." I shook my head. Hugh had just told us how he traded in his truck to get his wife a Range Rover. He said Sammy needs it for the kids and work. Hugh always did what was needed. He drove an old model Ford F-150, old and rusty, but it still runs fine. I said, "Jen, money doesn't grow on trees. But once you get back to work, you have to help pay for it." You see, Jen didn't work while she was married to Hugh. She did get a job after the divorce, but now she was out of work again. After Jen fussed for a few, she left to talk with some of the other wives. I sat down and talked to some of my lodge brothers. We talked for about an hour, then I started looking around for Jen. I spotted her about 10 minutes later. She was dancing with a lodge brother, so I went out to cut in. Jen said, "Hi honey, what's up?" I said, "Nothing. I just want to dance with my sexy wife." So I cut in, and my lodge brother left. I asked, "Jen, are you enjoying yourself?" She said, "Yes, I am. But it will be even better if you get me home and in bed." I didn't have to be asked twice. She grabbed her purse, and we headed for the door with me waving goodbye to my lodge brothers. Once we got in the car, Jen was on me, and she gave me an earth-shattering climax. Then she yelled, "Drive, boy." It was so good, I almost ran over a nun. I'm glad I didn't, because while she was good, it wasn't going to hell good. Once we got in the house, she looked at me and smiled. We had the wildest sex ever. The next morning, I was on the Range Rover website. Things were going well for us. Work was fine. The lodge was doing great, and sex was unbelievable. Then Jen laid the bomb on me. "Jeff," Jen said, "I'm 3 weeks pregnant." The first thing that crossed my mind was 45 years old and pregnant. By the time this kid gets out of the house, I'll be on Social Security. Boy, that was a bombshell. I have 2 kids, and Jen had Hugh Jr. He is 25 and has a kid of his own. Sandy, my daughter, is a senior at LSU, and my son Jacob is a junior at Ole Miss. Jen, are you sure? I asked. Yes, I am sure. I just got back from the doctor's office. Are we having a boy or girl? I asked. That's what we need to talk about. Do you really want to have another baby? Said Jen. I asked her, what did you want to do? She replied, we should think about it. Needless to say, it was a long night. The next morning, as Jen was leaving, I asked, what do you have planned for today? Jen looked and said, I don't know what's going on at the lodge. After I get my hair done, I'll give you a call. Okay, sexy. I love you, and I'll talk to you later, babe, I said. Then she was out the door in a flash. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang. Hello. I answered. Good morning. Is Mrs. Patterson in? The caller asked politely. I said, no, but this is her husband. Can I help you? Sir, your wife left her credit card here at the front desk. We were letting her know so that she could pick it up. Front desk? What front desk? I asked. Which hotel are you at? I can come by and pick it up myself and save her the trip. We're at the Hyatt Regency East. You have a very nice hotel there, I told the man. Thank you, sir. The card will be waiting for you at the front desk. Why do you suppose my wife would be at the Hyatt? I called Visa and asked for an itemized statement. They asked me, for which card number? I didn't have her card number, so I said, both. The lady on the phone asked me to hold on while she went to a supervisor. The supervisor said, Mr. Patterson, one of the cards is her personal card. We can't send you that bill. I asked, how does that bill get paid? The supervisor explained that the payments were split between the two cards on a 60% to 40% basis, and both were paid on the same invoice. I told him, I'm the person paying the bills, so either send me the statements or forget getting paid. The supervisor said they would check and see and get back to me. About 15 minutes later, I received the itemized statement in an email. It was worse than I thought. Jen had been going to the hotel twice a week for the last 6 months. I couldn't think of any reason that Jen needed to be using a hotel for. So now I was going to do something I never expected. Hello, who? I need your help. Who said, Jeff, come to the lodge and bring a suitcase. Bring a suitcase. I don't want to leave her. I just need help, I said. He repeated himself. Bring a suitcase. I grabbed one of the travel bags from the closet and drove to the lodge. Once I got there, it looked empty. Hugh opened the door and said, come on in. Once inside, we went to the security office, into the inside room where there were about 15 monitors. They had cameras everywhere. Hugh cleared his throat and said, Jeff, after you see this, I don't know if you'll be able to stay married. Think about what you want before you watch this. I said, Hugh, she's pregnant, and I have to know, or I can't move on. He said he understood. The tape was already booted up, so he hit play. The first thing I saw was Jen on her knees with 3 men around her. She screwed for at least an hour. Then she started cleaning herself up. She reached into her purse and pulled out some kind of squeeze bottle to flush herself out. No wonder she always carried a big purse. It was a travel sex kit. Hugh said, I told you to bring the suitcase for a reason, Jeff. I'm giving all of this to you. It's your marriage, so you decide. If you want to work it out, then work it out. But if you want to divorce her, you go ahead and use what I'm giving you. There must have been 30 tapes and 20 DVDs. Hugh shook his head as he said, she's been a busy girl. There were 4 lodge brothers and just about all of the staff on video having sex with Jen. The staff will be fired, Hugh continued, but the brothers will have to go before the board of trustees. Jeff, think long and hard, but do what works for you, said Hugh. Long and hard my rear. I was at my lawyer's office about 20 minutes later. He took everything I had and started the process. He told me I would have to give up some assets, but not half. The house, for example, was mine before the marriage, so it wasn't joint property. She could keep her slut mobile, but I just didn't want to pay spousal support. My lawyer said she would be served the next week. I asked him if he could have the papers served at the Hyatt next Wednesday. For the rest of the week, I went fishing. I told Jen it was a lodge thing. Wednesday rolled around pretty quickly. While Jen was having her little fling, a few of the brothers' wives, and I packed up Jen's stuff at the house. My cell phone started going off, and the caller ID showed it was Jen. Yellow. I said, "Jeff, what in the hell is this divorce stuff?" Jen asked, "Where were the papers delivered to you?" She didn't answer my question. She just went on the offensive. "Look, Jeff, you can't just throw me away. You love me and can't live without me. You said it yourselves," said Jen. "I can't live without food, dumb idiot, but 304s come a dime a dozen," I yelled. "I have to go, Jen. The truck just arrived to take your stuff to your mom's house." The last thing I heard as I signed off was her yelling. Things moved pretty fast after that, although Jen got the judge to hold off on the divorce till the baby was born. Then she started going to church. Then she told me that Hugh had drugged her and set her up. She kept repeating it so much I started having doubts. Then one of my friends, who had nothing to do with the lodge, took the tapes to a video lab to be tested. Once the lab concluded that they were authentic, Jen changed her story. She must have been drugged. Next, it was the devil made her do it. But now she's in church. I think she was praying that the baby would be mine. So here we are, sitting in the courtroom waiting for the DNA results to be read. The judge asked me, "Are you sure you want the results?" I responded, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge opened the results and asked Jen, "Do you know who the father of this child is?" "Yes, Your Honor. It's Jeff Patterson," she said. He looked at Jen and shook his head. "The game is over, Mrs. Patterson. Your husband is not the father of this child." The judge gave me an 85 to 15% split of our assets because we had only been married for 3 years. I have to pay her $75 a week for 2 years, and she got $11,000 from my savings, but no share of my retirement account. I did get stuck with the lawyer's fees, but that was okay because at least this mess was over. I had gotten off lucky. It's been 2 years now, and I have to make my last spousal support payment today. We're having a last payment to a 304 party at the lodge tonight. Every single one of my lodge brothers was there. It was packed. Hugh grabbed me and took me into the back room. "Jeff, I'd like you to meet the lodge's board of directors." The head of the board had his back to me when I entered the room. When he turned around, I almost spit out my drink. "Your Honor, what are you doing here?" I asked. "I am the chairman of the board," he said, a big grin on his face. What the heck? Both Jen's and my lawyers, and even my boss, were on the board. Hugh said, "Jeff, I once told you not to be afraid to ask for my help. You weren't afraid. And now it's your time." I was elected to the board, and there would be a day when it was my turn to help a fool in love. Oh, and my last payment to Jen I made in small coins. Who would think that the tellers at the bank would get mad for me asking for $75 in pennies at closing time? I know you think I'm a jerk. It's just I so love it when a cheater gets burnt. It may be a little over the top, but then so is the justice system. Now for the second story. The 5 of us sat in the living room of our cozy apartment. This little scenario had played out several times before as Lisa, my lovely bride of 3 years, and I hosted our parents. Unfortunately, this time it wasn't a pleasant Sunday dinner. My soon-to-be ex-wife sat on our couch, bookended by her parents, while my mother sat beside me on our love seat. I felt her squeeze my hand, reassuring me of her support. However, I knew she was struggling with her promise to me. I'd asked her not to speak during this confrontation, and to allow me to handle it my way. Begrudgingly, she'd agreed after I'd warned her about what was coming. The only thing she'd said after everyone arrived was in greeting them. However, She had plenty to say earlier. I remembered her words before my guest arrived. "I wish your father was here." I just nodded. I didn't have the heart to tell her I was glad he wasn't. No son wants his father to preside over his dying marriage. Added to that, I knew that he and Margaret, my mother-in-law, despised each other, and this meeting would have escalated into World War II. There wouldn't have been any chance my plan for handling this would have worked. I could almost hear his voice. "Son, do what you gotta do. Your mom, and I will stand by you." Then he would have given me that "I told you so" look and smile. All right, I lied. I missed him not being here. But I needed things to go as smoothly as possible if I was going to get through this without losing it. If he was here, that wouldn't have been possible. Of course, for this to go the way I hoped, I'd have to remain cold and emotionless. A week of stewing on the events of the past 7 days had taken me through the emotional ringer. I hoped I was numb enough to pull this off. It was my father-in-law who broke the awkward silence. "Danny, thank you for meeting with us." I looked at him and noticed he seemed tired. All three of them did. Apparently, there'd been a few sleepless nights in the Thomas household. I actually felt sorry for him. I liked my father-in-law. He was basically a pretty good guy, even though at times he could seem spineless when it came to his wife and daughter. On the far side of the couch sat my mother-in-law, the evil dragon of the north, perched, ready to swoop down and attack. Margaret, don't call me Marge, could barely contain her contempt for me. To say that I was her least favorite person for stealing one of her babies would be a gross understatement. The fact that I defiled her innocent daughter before the wedding just added to her reasons that I should be publicly drawn and quartered. Of course, the fact that Lisa wasn't a virgin when I met her. Well, let's not let the facts get in the way of a good reason for a witch hunt. I knew this meeting would be extremely difficult on her, and that thought kept a small smirk on my face. She'd be forced to swallow her venom if they had any hope this marriage could be saved. It couldn't be, but they weren't convinced of that yet. In between her parents sat Lisa, dressed in jeans and a blouse. I thought she looked beautiful. She wasn't model material, but more girl next door pretty. Even with her eyes bright red from crying, I could still see the girl I'd fallen in love with 5 years ago. When I looked at her, I found it suddenly hard to breathe, and my heart pounded against my ribs like they were an anvil. I may have appeared cold and calm on the outside, but inside the pain was still raw. It appeared she wasn't doing any better. Of course, I didn't have much sympathy for her since it was her actions that brought this on us. It was my reaction, however, that disrupted her little sister's wedding reception last Saturday. No doubt the guests would remember Stephanie and Mike's wedding for a long time. Since then, Lisa had been staying with her parents. This is the first time we'd met face-to-face since the wedding. The few times I talked to her over the phone were pretty much a disaster, so I stopped taking her calls. I'd asked her why, and her responses were basically pathetic excuses. I realized I may not have ever really known my wife. "I know this has been a very difficult time for the both of you," my father-in-law continued, "but hopefully we can talk a few things out and begin trying to heal your marriage." "Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but there's really no reason to try resuscitating something that's dead. Thankfully, we hadn't had kids yet. The only thing left to do now is to figure out how to bury it and begin the divorce." "Danny," Lisa whispered with tears running down her face, "I don't want a divorce." I studied her and clenched my jaw in an attempt to stay calm. And I didn't want to catch my wife screwing her ex-boyfriend at her sister's wedding reception. I spat. I guess I didn't hide my anger well. "We don't need that kind of language, Daniel," the dragon stated in a condescending voice, making my skin crawl. "This isn't your home, Marge," I growled, "and you're welcome to leave any time you want." I could see her actually gag as she choked down her response. She shocked me, though, and didn't say anything. Hell must have frozen over. "Danny, I'm so sorry," Lisa whimpered. "It was a mistake." "A mistake," I said, trying not to sneer. Given the response of those on my couch, I apparently failed. Tell me, Lisa, what exactly was the mistake? Was it getting so drunk at the reception you thought it was okay to show everyone how well you could dirty dance with your supposed ex-boyfriend? Or was it when I pulled the two of you apart and you told me and everyone watching, you don't own me, and you dance with whomever I damn well choose? Maybe it was my mistake for taking my eyes off of you. An hour later, I turned around and you disappeared. Then when I finally found you, you're just merrily humping away with that little twit. I sure as heck know it wasn't a mistake when I hit him and kept hitting him until you started screaming that I was killing him. I might have been wrong to stop though, because when I turned to face you, the little coward ran. So tell me, Lisa, just where exactly was the mistake? Were you dancing so close that when you looked down, you went, oops, look what accidentally got stuck in me? Danny, it was just, she sobbed, I was drunk. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Don't know what happened. It's pretty simple. I'm sure Marge told you about the birds and the bees. That's when the guy puts his thingy in your thingy. Of course, after you're married, there's not supposed to be any other guy's thingy in there other than your husband's. Please, Danny, I'm sorry. It'll never happen again. Danny, her father interceded. I know this seems really, really bad. I started to respond, but he put up his hand and continued. All right. I know it is that bad, he continued, but it was a one-time thing. Son, I know you two can get through this. You're strong enough to be able to forgive her for this. Well, Mr. Thomas, I don't know if I could get past a one-time thing or not, but this isn't a one-time thing, is it, Lisa? I watched her face turn even paler as I turned back to my father-in-law. It seems your daughter was such a thoughtful big sister at Stephanie's bachelorette party that she took it upon herself to show her little sister the proper way to give a BJ. Apparently, Stephanie was a quick learner. I received a great video earlier this week. Surprising how good cell phone videos are nowadays. It might not be spicy site quality, but it was good enough to make out the Thomas sisters giving two male strippers a couple of killer BJs. Lisa buried her face in her hands. Oh God, she moaned. I wonder if Mike knows. Not the part about her giving great BJs after a week-long honeymoon cruise. I'm sure he already knows that. I'm talking about the stripper part of the story. Somebody should tell him, don't you think? I mean, he'll believe that string of crap. It was a one-time mistake, won't he? Phil and Marge were now as pale as their daughter. Lisa's sobs punctuated the eerily silent room. I'll admit what happened next surprised me. I figured that little revelation concerning the strippers would put an end to this meeting. I was wrong. First, I was surprised she'd been able to stay quiet as long as she did. Next, I thought she'd try to do damage control and try to guilt me into staying in the marriage. Well, at least until I screwed up, and then Lisa could publicly divorce me. That was my mistake, I thought. Seems the dragon believed the best defense was a good offense. So she attacked. You sanctimonious turd, she growled. You sit there acting so smug and innocent. Margaret, please, Phil pleaded. No, I'm not going to let this little piss-ant threaten to blackmail this family, especially when I've got proof he's as guilty as Lisa. To say there was a stunned silence by everyone in the room would have been an understatement. Then she began digging in that backpack she calls a purse. Moments later, like a magician pulling a rabbit out of his hat, she produced a small manila envelope. To be honest, I was a little disappointed that she didn't yell, "Tada!" Here, choke on this, she snarled, throwing the envelope at me. Inside you'll find pictures of your car outside the roadside motel last month when you were supposed to be in Chicago on a business trip. There are also copies of the motel registration. My mother gasped and squeezed my hand. Using the name John Smith wasn't very original. Marge smirked as she continued, but the attendant logged your license plate number. Lisa kept her face buried in her hands and sobbed. Marge wrapped her arms around her, trying to console her. It's okay, honey, she cooed softly. Mama took care of it. I told all the women at the church 2 weeks ago. I'm sure most people around town know about it by now. When they hear what happened at the reception, they'll know it was because he cheated first. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. I was shocked at how calm I was on the outside. Inside, my heart was trying to break through my chest, while my brain screamed at me to slay the dragon. Maybe I was in shock. I looked through the contents of the package, and then gave it to my mother. I noticed she had tears forming in her eyes. I gently patted her hand and smiled. "Well, Marge," I stated calmly as I turned my attention back to the beast, "before you plan on your own little CSI episode, you might want to brush up on your detective skills. That Chicago business trip was actually a training seminar my company sent me to in order to get certified. I have about 30 other attendees that can vouch that I was at every boring session for all 4 days. While I was out of town, we put Lisa's car in the shop for some maintenance repairs. Want to guess whose vehicle she drove while it was in the shop? Another little piece of information that you'll find interesting. Do you remember the names of the people who work with Lisa down at the Southside Medical Clinic? Come on, Marge. Surely you remember Dr. Sammy. Well, his full name is Dr. Samuel Jonathan Smith. But my father-in-law sputtered. He's older than I am. Yeah, seems your little girl has daddy issues to go along with some latent tendencies. Good luck with counseling. Danny, Lisa whispered. Yeah, I know, I snapped at her. It was only a one-time. I stood and looked at the trio sitting on my couch. I didn't think I could hold it together much longer, so I needed this to be over quickly. I think we've pretty much said everything that needed to be said. It's time for you all to leave. Phil stood and helped Lisa to her feet. Marge remained sitting, frozen. I thought at first maybe she was having a seizure or maybe even a stroke, but no such luck. She gathered herself and stood, staring at me straight in the eyes. She gave me a parting shot. I expected better from you, Daniel. And I expected nothing less from you, Marge. You acted just like the self-righteous, hypocritical witch that you are. Now get out of my apartment. She left angry, but at least she left. Phil surprised me by giving me a big hug before he chased after her. That only left Lisa, when she looked up at me with her beautiful green eyes, puffy from crying and so full of pain, I couldn't stop my own eyes from watering. Danny, I can't tell you how ashamed I am, she said softly. I'm so sorry. Not half as sorry as I am, Lisa. I'm sorry I wasted my love on someone like you. She sobbed and ran out the door. As I closed the door behind her, my emotions overwhelmed me. I rested my head on the door and fought a losing battle, trying to hold back the tears. The simple fact was I loved the lying, cheating woman, and she'd hurt me like I'd never been hurt before. I still didn't know why she cheated, but even knowing the reason wouldn't have changed the fact my marriage was dead. I knew my pain, anger, and depression weren't going to go away anytime soon. My mother came over and hugged me. You okay? She said softly. No, I whispered. And I won't be for a while. But I'll get there. You know, your dad would have been proud of how you handled that. Do you know what you're going to do now? I nodded. Yeah, there's really not much to split up, so I think I'll take Marge's advice and go for maximum embarrassment. I'll have Lisa served as they're leaving their church on Sunday. I'll also see if I can sue the good doctor and his clinic. Even if I can't win, I'll make sure he's served at work. That should cause a scene. What about Mike and Stephanie? Mom, if someone sent that video to me, there's a good chance they sent it to Mike as well. Even if they didn't, he needs to know. Maybe they can work through it. I hope they can. If they do, maybe it'll stop any future cheating, and their marriage will last longer than the 3 years mine did. I'll email Stephanie and tell her she's got a week to tell him herself before I do. She looked at me and smirked. You're just like your dad, she said, shaking her head. Too bad he couldn't have at least heard our meeting. She smiled innocently and reached for her purse. Opening it, she pulled out a micro recorder. He asked me to record it so he could hear it when I got home. You know it almost killed him not being here today. He was disappointed when you asked him not to come. He understood, but I still think it hurt his feelings. Well, it looks like I'll have plenty of time to make it up to him since most of my future plans are now in the toilet. I slowly shook my head and sighed. I feel like I've wasted 5 years of my life. No, she said softly, not wasted. You just learned some very painful lessons. Hopefully you'll use it to make your next marriage even stronger. Next marriage, I snorted. I'm not sure I'll ever trust another woman enough to marry her. She stepped back and smiled at me. Honey, you're 27. It will take a long time, but you'll find some lucky girl who will be special enough for you to try again. My mom, I chuckled. The eternal optimist. She reached up and kissed my cheek. I have to be. I'm still expecting some grandbabies out of you. We both laughed. The sound of our laughter reassured me. I'd be happy again someday. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.